Hello and welcome to the video. This video will be focusing on Jorge Luis Borges' short stories. In this video, we'll be going through 16 of his works. Let's get right into it. He is a master of mind-bending literary puzzles and lots of very interesting stories dealing with infinity and dreams. And whether you're here just to make sense of some of these plots or trying to learn some more quizable clues for your next tournament, I've got you covered. We're going to break down plots. I'm going to highlight high-frequency clues, characters, and recurring motifs. Grab a snack, grab a pen maybe, and let's head right in. We'll be starting with the most common of his stories, and as the video goes on, we'll get into nicher clues, different stories that show up less often, but still important. But that means our first one will be the most common, and this story is going to be The Garden of Forking Paths. So, The Garden of Forking Paths follows the German spy Tlön, who is pursued across England by the MI5 agent Captain Richard Madden. His goal is to communicate the location of the British artillery park to his Berlin handler. To do this, Tlön starts by traveling to Ashgrove. He meets the sinologist Stephen Albert there. Albert explains that Tlön's ancestor, Tsui Pen, attempted to create an infinite labyrinth, but it wasn't actually a physical labyrinth, rather it was an endless novel. Tlön shoots and kills Albert to ensure that the name Albert appears in the newspaper headlines. He does this because he found out that the artillery park of the British is in the town of Albert. So, while he is caught and killed, he is able to transmit the location to the Germans. So that's the very basic overview. So we're going to talk a bit about some more clues. So yes, you have the four main characters, Tlön, who's the narrator and the spy, his ancestor, Tsui Pen, you have the sinologist, Dr. Stephen Albert, and then you have the British Captain Richard Madden. Some of the key concepts from this is going to be the book itself, this Garden of Forking Paths. The main clue here is going to be talking about the word chess. So there's a riddle within the story, and the riddle asks for the word chess, but the answer prohibits the word chess itself. It's a bit of a paradox within the story, which Borges loves to explore. Another clue here about the novel/labyrinth is it doesn't use the word time at all, so it omits that word. So those are going to be the main clues for the Garden of Forking Paths. So we're going to move on to the other of his most common stories, the Library of Babel. So the Library of Babel is set in a vast, potentially infinite universe structured as a network of hexagonal rooms. Within this Library of Babel, it contains every possible 410-page book. Each of these books is constructed from a 25-character alphabet, which includes some symbols as well, and the library consists of every possible combination of those 25 characters within 410 pages. So all of these volumes, or almost all of them, are just total gibberish of text that makes no sense, and this leads to the inhabitants of this world to basically suffer different crises. It leads to cults, fanaticism, and a lot of weird stuff. So besides this main clue of these infinite hexagonal rooms with the books of 410 pages, you also have a group of people called the Purifiers. So this group travels around and destroys meaningless books, and their goal is to find the mythical Crimson Hexagon and the legend of the Man of the Book, or the Vindications. So this group searches for the Vindications here. Okay, so also in the story, it ends by the narrator saying that my solitude is gladdened by this elegant hope. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next story, which is going to be the Aleph. So the Aleph follows the death of the narrator's beloved Beatrice Viterbo. The narrator of the story, possibly fictionalized Borges himself, visits the family home, and he meets her eccentric cousin, the poet Carlos Argentino Dineri. This poet is not exactly successful, but he's attempting to write this sprawling poem called The Earth. So on the 19th step of the cellar staircase of their home is where you find the Aleph. This Aleph, a tiny, iridescent point, allows a person to view every point in the universe simultaneously from every angle at this one point here on this 19th step. Another example of this kind of idea of infinity shows up in the story, of course, just as the previous two have. It's a very common theme throughout Borges's plots. Okay, so yes, we had the Beatriz Viterbo, who is the beloved, her cousin Carlos Argentino Deneri, who's writing the poem The Earth, and you have this point on the 19th step. Okay, we're going to move on to the next clue. This is going to be the story Death and the Compass. So in this story, the detective Eric Lonrot is investigating a series of murders. He finds a possible pattern of some sort of Kabbalistic geometric pattern, and one of the deaths is that of a rabbi. He uses these deaths to point out a equilateral triangle, which is based on the tetragrammaton. Using this idea, he predicts where the fourth murder will occur, so he goes to this spot, an abandoned villa, but he discovers that the master criminal, Red Scarlock, engineered the entire puzzle specifically to trap him. He is caught there and executed to avenge Scarlock's brother. Okay, so that's the overview. So yes, we have the detective Eric Lonrot, the criminal Red Scarlock, and the murders that are mapped according to the tetragrammaton, which is the four-letter name of God. And one of these murders involves a rabbi in a hotel room. Okay, next we're going to move on to a different kind of story. This is going to be Pierre Menard, author of the Quixote. So this is a bit of a meta text. It's written in the style of a literary review. The narrator of this story is evaluating the work of the French symbolist poet Pierre Menard. This poet is entirely fictional. Menard's ultimate goal was to not rewrite or change Don Quixote, but to literally copy it exactly, word for word. So yeah, this word for word recreation by Pierre Menard shows up for Borges. Okay, we're going to move on to story 6. This story is going to be Tlön, Uqbar, Orbis Tertius. So this story follows a narrator and his friend Adolfo Bio Casares. They discover an anomaly in a volume of the Anglo-American Cyclopedia, which describes an unknown country called Uqbar. This leads to the discovery of a secret society, Orbis Tertius, that spends centuries inventing a fictional world named Tlön. So as Tlön's idealist philosophies and artifact rules leak into reality, the physical world begins to turn into Tlön. This is kind of another example of this idea of dreams and that bleeding into the world. Okay, so a few things about this story is that Tlön, the languages of Tlön, completely lack nouns. They only use verbs, adverbs, etc. They have no nouns. So one quote here that they clue a lot is going to be the translated phrase, upward behind the on-streaming it mooned. Also another quote is that mirrors and copulation are abominable. And then we also have, again, these pages in the Anglo-American Cyclopedia with his friend Bio Casares. Okay, so that's that story. Next, we're going to move on to the South. So the South follows Juan Dolman, who is a secretary at a Buenos Aires library, who accidentally strikes his forehead on an open window frame while rushing upstairs to read The 1001 Nights, the Arabian Nights. After suffering a severe feverish illness in a sanitarium, he recovers and travels south to his ancestral ranch. At a rural cafe, a group of men throw breadcrumbs at him, escalating into a challenge. Dolman steps out into the plain with a knife to face his likely death. He views it as a noble romantic exit, and he prefers this over dying in a hospital bed. He then has a knife fight against these men. So that's the plot overview. So yes, the clues going to be following Juan Dolman. The clue they love to throw in here is going to be this striking of his forehead as he's running upstairs. And then, again, these breadcrumbs in the cafe, which leads to a knife fight. Okay, so now we're going to be halfway here with the next story, which is Funes the Memorious. So Funes, the title character, has a horse riding accident, and this accident leaves him paralyzed. But instead of, remaining injured, he gains this ability to perceive and remember every detail of his life with absolute precision. He remembers every leaf on every tree, the shape of every cloud, and he can reconstruct entire days in his memory. However, the narrator observes that Funes' total recall leaves him almost incapable of abstract thought or generalization, as he is burdened by an overwhelming flood of sensory history. So there's lots of clues in this story that they like. Of course, the main one is going to be this horse riding accident, which leads to this memory. But another clue they love to add is inventing an alternate numbering system where he gives a new name to every number, and he tries to create a system where each memory has a label in his mind. Okay, so next we're going to move on to the Circular Ruins. In this story, we follow a wounded magician. He comes ashore near the ruins of an ancient circular temple to the god of fire. His overall goal is to dream a man into existence, piece by piece, and turn him into reality. After lots of effort, the fire god consents to animate the dreamed son, turning him into real life, making him imperceptible to fire so he can pass as a real human. Later, when a forest fire engulfs the temple, the magician steps into the flames expecting death, only to realize he feels no pain, discovering that he too is a dream of someone else. Again, here's another example of this idea of dreams and reality blending. So yes, this main clue here is going to be this magician who dreams a person into reality, and also that he too was just a dream. Okay, next up we got story number 10, is going to be the Zahir. So following the narrator's funeral of his love interest Clementina Villar, the narrator receives a 10-cent coin, a Zahir, in change at a tavern. This Zahir, this coin, is an object that, once seen, gradually consumes the observer's mind until they can think of nothing else. The narrator attempts to rid himself of the coin at a bar, but the image of the coin continues to dominate his thoughts, which drives him towards madness. So yeah, a few clues here is going to be this death of Clementina Villar. The title Zahir is a 10-cent coin in Buenos Aires, but this Zahir is also like a historical manifestation. This is just the current manifestation. In the past, it's been other objects like an astrolabe or a tiger, etc. Okay, so next we're going to move on to the next story, which is the lottery in Babylon. So this story traces how a monetary lottery in ancient Babylon evolved into an all-encompassing social system operated by a secretive entity known as the company. So initially offering simple cash prizes, the lottery introduced negative outcomes such as fines, imprisonment, and eventually execution to generate excitement. Eventually, non-buyers were penalized, and every citizen was forced to participate, and the lottery was expanded to dictate every event, social role, and circumstance of human life. So a few clues here is, of course, going to be this company, but also there's a very important quote, which is going to be, "Like all men in Babylon, I have been proconsul. Like them all, a slave." This idea of the proconsul and slave is clued often for this. So next up, we're going to be talking about the story, Three Versions of Judas. So this is kind of similar to the previous Pierre Menard story. It's kind of a meta clue or a meta story here. It's written as a mock scholarly essay, which outlines the theological theories of the fictitious Swedish theologian Niels Runeberg. So Runeberg publishes works arguing that Judas was not a villain, but rather a central figure in humanity's salvation. His theories progress from just proposing that Judas betrayed Jesus to force his divine manifestation, but eventually arguing that God lowered himself to the absolute lowest point of human existence by becoming incarnate not as Christ, but actually as Judas. Runeberg dies of an aneurysm, believing he has committed the unforgivable sin against the Holy Ghost. So the main clue here is going to be just this man's name, the Swedish theologian Niels Runeberg. Next up, we have the story, The Book of Sand. So a retired man living alone in Buenos Aires is visited by a Scottish Bible seller who offers him a mysterious book written in an unknown script. The narrator discovers that this book is no ordinary book. Rather, its pages are infinite, and once a page is turned, that page will never be found again. The narrator is obsessed with trying to catalog all of the pages, but he loses sleep and sanity because the task is impossible. Recognizing that this book is just monstrous, he sneaks into the National Library of Argentina and hides it on a random dusty basement shelf, reasoning that the best place to hide a leaf is in a forest. Another clue here is going to be the small illustrations and the title Holy Writ, which are written on its spine. Okay, so the concept that the book's pages are infinite comes with a quote, "Neither the book nor the sand has a beginning or an end." And he hides it into the library to avoid burning it to create an infinite smoke. The next story is going to be Borges and I. This one-page parable, structured around a dual identity monologue, explores the tension between the private individual, I, and the public literary persona, who is Borges. The narrator explains that while he prefers simple pleasures like walking through Buenos Aires, looking at maps, and drinking coffee, his alter ego, who is the public author of Borges, claims those experiences, commodifies them, and turns them into literature. Over time, the narrator feels his true self disappearing into the myth of the author, and this culminates in an existential realization about who is actually writing the text. And this happens with the quote, "I do not know which of us two is writing this page." Two more to go. So next up, we have the story On Exactitude in Science. So this story is presented as a single paragraph fragment, which is attributed to a fictional work by Suarez Miranda. The story describes an empire where the Guild of Cartographers creates a map so detailed and absurdly accurate that its scale is exactly 1-to-1. It matches the size of the empire point for point. It's an exact copy. Subsequent generations of this empire deem the massive map useless and abandon it, leaving it to rot and be a refuge for beggars and beasts. So yeah, this is going to be another meta work which is attributed to Suarez Miranda. An interesting literary influence of this is going to be Jean Baudrillard's concept of the hyperreal and the procession of simulacra. Okay, so next up is going to be our last story we're going to be talking about. This story is going to be Emma Zunes. So this follows the 18-year-old factory worker Emma Zunes, who receives a letter announcing that her father died in Brazil from a drug overdose. Believing he actually committed suicide due to the shame of being wrongfully accused of embezzlement, Emma decides to avenge him by targeting the textile mill owner Aaron Lowenthal, who was the culprit who framed her father. She contacts Lowenthal to schedule a late-at-night meeting under the guise of reporting a planned labor strike. But this is just a trap. Before meeting him, she picks up a foreign sailor at the docks and sleeps with him and uses that real grief and trauma to construct a cover story. And when meeting with Aaron Lowenthal at the mill, she retrieves Lowenthal's gun and shoots him, telling the police that she acted in self-defense after he tried to assault her. So yeah, the two characters here are going to be the title Emma Zunes and the factory owner Aaron Lowenthal. One quote that ends this is going to be that the story was incredible, but it impressed everyone because substantially it was true. Okay, so we just covered a lot of content from Borges. We went through 16 different stories, lots of clues, but hopefully you gained something from that. So next, we're going to look at the database and look at actual clues and questions. Okay, so here we are at the database. Got Borges from 2016 because there is plenty of results to look at. So again, I have regular high school through regionals college. So let's just randomize this and take a look. Okay, so let's look here. Starting off at a slightly more difficult questions. So here is the killing of a rabbi in a hotel room from Death in the Compass. And also we have the Tetragrammaton clue and Red Scarlock from Death in the Compass with Detective Eric Lonrod. And then finally, Beatrice Viterbo with the title spherical object being the Aleph. Okay. Next, we have the Funes the Memorious, which is a title of one of his stories. Also have the Aleph here as well. And then finally, we have Yutzun and Richard Madden from the Garden of Forking Paths and Infinite Hexagonal Rooms in the Library of Babel. Okay, so here we have a pace question. So here we have a wizard walking into fire because someone else was dreaming him. So this is from the Circular Ruins. And then we have Vindications and Purifiers from the Library of Babel with those 410-page books. Next, we're going to be another difficulty 8, so a difficult question. So here we have the Wycliffe Bible for the title object, which is going to be the Book of Sand. And then also the Pierre Menard trying to be Cervantes to rewrite Don Quixote with Pierre Menard, author of the Quixote. Okay, we're going to do this Penable question, much more difficult question. Finally, getting here at the end with the unknown language with no beginning or end. This is going to be that Book of Sand. Once again, here's that Red Scarlock from Death in the Compass and Beatrice Viterbo from the Aleph. Another pace, very recent here. Here's going to be that forbidden word chess, not containing the word time, and the Artillery Park with the Sinologist, Stephen Albert, from the Garden of Forking Paths. We're going to look at just a few more here. So we have the missing pages of Anglo-American Cyclopedia, which is going to be for Tlön, Uqbar, Orbis Tertius. Again, some more Uqbar questions. And then here we have the proconsul and slave clue. So this is going to be from the Lottery in Babylon, which we have that title, The Company. And then also we have the Man of the Book, which is from the Library of Babel. We'll look at two more here. So let's look at this. So here we have the I do not know which of us has written this page from Borges and I. And then we're just going to look at this question with the 1001 Nights knife fight with Juan Dalman from the South. Okay, so a lot of these questions, this is a here, lots of these questions are very gettable in power with all of these clues that we've gone over. We did go over a lot, but a lot of them show up and will help you in your future tournaments whenever Borges shows up. Even for some more difficult questions, from PACE to even more difficult college, it will help out a lot. So hopefully you learned something new, and I hope you get some more powers. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any future suggestions, please put them in the comments so I know what people want me to make next. We learned a lot today, and hopefully you can get more powers in your future tournaments. I'll see you guys next time. Happy powering!